Corja is a fuglachani, is more an ahas atá orm, agus tá mé brodúil bheith an seo aniu, I given a sideúirí fuglach na héireann, a fuair bás son ar déir seo, iad an líon an 1950 agus 1951. We're gathered here once again to pay tribute to 10 of Ireland's noblest and bravest sons who gave their lives for Ireland over 90 years ago. And of course the first we remember is poor Kevin Barry, the 18-year-old youth, the student who had had much to look forward to in life. All the events that should have been his were denied him because he put his country first, and he went to the gallows proud and defiant because he wasn't prepared to accept British rule here in Ireland without question or without challenge. And the leadership of the Republican movement of the day were so upset at his sentencing to death, but they passed a comment which I think was very appropriate and sums up Kevin's life, that if Kevin did have any regrets, it would be because he only had one life to give for Ireland. And many, many people who took part in the vigil lived on into old age, and that vigil left an indelible mark in their memories, because on the morning of Kevin's execution, it was a morning wrapped in mist and grey, and the sun never rose in the sky, and the waters of the Liffey, they looked dark and threatening. And a strange phenomenon was noticed that day, and has been noticed on other occasions too, when martyrs were hanged. There was a peculiar red tinge in the water, as though it coincided with the martyr's blood ebbing away. And poor Kevin walked to the gallows, a proud and defiant soldier, and his broken-hearted mother and family had to endure the loss, the great loss of a boy who had so much to live for in life. Also, we remember today Frank Flood, friend, comrade, fellow student of Kevin Barry. He was a very clever boy, lively, full of life, full of fun, full of mischief, a typical boy of his age, and at sometimes too a prankster. But poor Frank Flood was executed in March, the 14th of March 1921. And the worst news his family could have received, because it was the norm in those days, and even in the Civil War, to take food into the prison. For them, it was an absolute tragedy to be told not to take any more food. They knew then that that was the end. There was absolutely no grief. On the evening before his execution, he wrote a letter to his little brother Alfie, to whom he was very, very attached, because he obviously would have known that a child, with the passage of time, the memory of him might fade. But Alfie would have cherished that letter all the days of his life, because it would have always reminded him that Frank, his big brother, was a soldier, a patriot, a martyr and a hero, as indeed were all the volunteers we remember here today. We also remember Patrick Morden from County Roscommon. He had taken part in the 1916 Rising. He was in Jacob's factory under the command of Thomas MacDonagh. Second in command also was Major John McBride. He worked in the bar trade and was in the union, the Vintners Union. And he was a great organiser and worked tirelessly for the freedom of Ireland. And during the conscription debacle in 1918, he organised a general strike in opposition to it. Poor Patrick Morden was incarcerated in Mountjoy, and he had an opportunity to escape, but there was absolutely no evidence whatsoever against him, and he decided to make the sacrifice and let other prisoners, including Ernie O'Malley, escape. But poor Patrick Morden too was executed on the 14th of March 1921. At one stage during his career, he worked in a bar, Lynch and O'Brien's in Dunleary, which would then have been called Kingstown, and there's now today a small park there in Dunleary named in his memory. Tommy Whelan was from Clifton, County Galway. a lovely boy who lodged in Barrow Street near Shelburne Park in Ringsend. He had a lovely tenor voice, very similar to John McCormack, and a Republican fete was held in Shelburne Park in aid of the prisoners' dependents of the day. And he drew great crowds because he sang Moore's melodies, and he also was synonymous with the song The Shawl of Galway Grey. He sang that to his mother in the cell the evening before his execution. Now, in the house where he lodged, the Mann family, they were very, very attached to him, and he was presented with a box of chocolates by actually one of his jailers, which in turn he sent to the little girl, Alicia Mann, in the household. Now, he said if he survived, if he was reprieved, she could enjoy the chocolates, but if not, she must keep them as a memento. And Alicia Mann lived into old age and kept those. They were never opened. They were sealed in memory of poor Thomas Whelan. Patrick Doyle, he was an outstanding volunteer from the Phibsborough area. We had his descendants at Mass today. Unfortunately, they apologise, they can't be here because one of the family is ill. But Patrick was a great volunteer and was sentenced to death. Now, his poor wife went to visit him before he was executed, and she had her twin babies with her to say goodbye to them, because I don't think he'd even seen them. And she also had her little toddler Kathleen with her. But on the way back from having said goodbye to Patrick, one of her twin babies died in her arms. It was absolutely too much, clearly, for the human heart to bear. But not only that, in a matter of weeks later, his brother Sean was killed in the attack, the burning of the Custom House in 1921, which of course finished the stranglehold of the British and their intelligence on in this part of Ireland anyway. We remember Patrick Doyle with pride today. Bernard Ryan was a volunteer and was involved in the Gaelic League, everything that was Irish. It was always uppermost in his mind. Now, he had actually taken part in the match on Bloody Sunday, and he saw at first hand what happened to the spectators and the player, and of course he threw himself ever more resolutely into the struggle and was also executed on the 21st of March. Tommy Bryan, a brave volunteer of the Dublin Brigade, he had shared a cell with Thomas Ashe, and was very, very upset at his death, which of course the force feeding really killed him. And Modron McBride visited him in prison. He was then transferred to Dundalk because of his broken heart, I suppose, over the death of Tom Ashe. Now, his poor wife Annie, they were only 3 months married when she became a widow at 20 years of age, and he too went to the gallows with the rest of the volunteers, a proud and defiant soldier of the Republic. Thomas Traynor, we have his descendants here today, a great volunteer. He had taken part in the 1916 Rising. He was in Boland's Mill. He was the father of 10 children, and it was even a greater sacrifice for him to have to leave those. And ironically, he was executed on the 25th of April, 5 years almost to the day of the anniversary of the Rising, in which he had played so great a role. And I think the next few words, the next few lines sums up all his bravery. Let my loving wife neither weep nor sigh. For Ireland's cause I am proud to die. Proud to die though my children dear, their father's voice no more shall hear. Edward Foley and Patrick Marr were 2 brilliant volunteers too. They took part in a very famous rescue, the station at Knocklang, and volunteer Sean Hogan was released because Dan Green and his comrade and friend Sean Tracy also took part in that. It was made famous in song and story, and both the freedom fighter Dan Green and Sean Tracy were very severely wounded in that episode, but luckily there was a doctor who was sympathetic to the Republican cause who more or less saved their lives. But Edmund Foley and Patrick Marr were sought out and eventually arrested, and they too were executed. Now, excuse me just a moment. Dan Breen and Sean Tracy were comrades of theirs, and poor Sean Tracy, of course, was to die in a hail of bullets in Talbot Street. And also who took part in that event, that ambush, was Dick McKee, who was OC of the Dublin Brigade at the time. Now, he had a bicycle parked nearby, and he actually offered it at his own peril to Sean Tracy to escape, but unfortunately he was so gravely wounded that he died on the footpath in Talbot Street. Is dag sé san áitan ar hit sé, is pillar tríd ocht, nach siluera ein jora, son aside dropped. Dick McKee, of course, made good his escape on his bicycle, but that was very short-lived, because 3 weeks after poor Kevin's execution, he died along with Conor Clune and Padder Clancy, murdered in Dublin Castle. We remember all those volunteers today. Over 90 years on, we look at Ireland and wonder, what was it all about? Just a country absolutely indebted up to billions and billions, debt-ridden, crime-ridden, greed-ridden, and the names of a lot of those volunteers just swept into the background as though they never existed. And one could be cynical, but we have to be motivated. We look back at their sacrifices and must carry on, because in the darkest days they were an inspiration, and they still are to Republicans today, because they kept the flame alive on Tinabio. They created a pattern or template or the type of Ireland, a 32-county Ireland, that we would all aspire to. We remember them all with pride today, and must ever be motivated to ensure that the sacrifices they made were not in vain, and the new Ireland that would make them proud will rise up in her glory, be a true testament to each and one of the volunteers we remember here today. May Lord rest all their souls. Tells the nation where the grass is o'er, for many a weary year, yet their memories still fill the land of border. Their spirits linger still.